Okay, thank you all for coming to see Mark Manley's presentation. I won't go into the presentation, I'll let Mark do that. I'm sure you've all heard of Mark Manley. If you get the Nutwood, news, he's been doing a lot of fantastic artwork, some of the cover artwork. Really, well, I really like his work. I'm sure you do as well. Got many projects on the go, and he's come today to share one or two of his projects he's doing and explain a little bit more about how he does it and how it all works.
Before you start, Mark, would you like lighting doing this a bit?
I don't mind. I mean, I'm happy with whatever's comfortable for the audience.
It was for Harold this morning.
Ooh,
yes,
yeah. Oh. Mood lighting.
Yeah, so no more introduction needed. Mark's got some fabulous artwork on his stall, so afterwards if you're interested, go and see him, or even if you want to have a chat with him, and I'll let him get on with it. Off you go, Mark.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Almost like being on the city show, isn't it? Yes, thanks, Charles, for that. Many of you were here last year when I did my talk about the digital colouring process that I did on the story that I was working on with John Harold, which was called Rupert and the Water Fairy. This year I'm going to talk about another project I'm doing, which isn't with John Harold, and it's not necessarily about digital art. It's about the restoration of a 1960s Rupert story by Alfred Bestall called Rupert and the Weatherman. And it was published in the Daily Express in 1964, but has never been published in colour in an annual. And so we are about to publish a sequel to the Bestall book that we published last year called the Rupert Storybook, which will feature stories by Mary Tourtel, Alfred Bestall, and John Harold. And
sorry, Mark, could you speak up a bit?
Yes.
I think a few people at the back are straining.
Sorry. So anyway, so there will be new stories that have never been appeared in print in colour before. And John Beck asked me if I would colour Rupert and the Weatherman for the book. Now, the only problem being that the only printed material we have, the only available artwork we have for Rupert and the Weatherman is newspaper clippings from the 60s. Now, I think you're all aware that even though we don't get newspapers anymore, that newspaper print is a very rough, poor quality paper, and the printing ink obviously splurged and stuff. So what we've got to work from is this. This is obviously much magnified to go on the wall, but imagine this is an A4 piece of paper, and these are very small newspaper clippings. They're not really of a quality that you can see would go into an annual. They need tidying up, essentially, and cleaning up. I'm going to zoom in again. This is episode 1, and as you can see, it's Tuesday the 16th of June 1964. But you can see there's the half-tones that are put on to colour certain dark areas, especially the jersey, in the newspaper printing. And there's significantly, at this point, Alfred Bestall's artwork was quite, his line work was quite chunky anyway. It wasn't as thin and refined as it had been in the past. But you could see where some of the lines have bled a little, and there's blotches, and his eye is about 5 times the size it should be, and all this sort of thing. So it's not an ideal image to print. And I'm just zooming in again so you get a better, you can see some of the smudgy stuff. Now, with help from John, we removed the dots, the half-tones, and that left us with this. Now, my plan, as I described it to John Beck, was to take each image and clean it digitally on my iPad. And this, as some of you will remember from last year, is my magic iPad. And basically, the idea was to essentially run my digital eraser along all of these edges to make them clean again, to make them presentable for print. And that's what I did. So I cleaned up all of the edges. Basically, I used this stylus on my screen and ran around with basically a white, almost Tipex, I suppose you would say, just to tidy up all the, and that's very time consuming. You know, every single line needed tidied up. And then, of course, details like the fingers and stuff had to be clarified as well. Now, you will notice I have given Rupert fingernails. because John Harold gives Rupert fingernails, and I could see indications of them in the original Bestall artwork. But apparently Freddie Chaplin didn't like Rupert having fingernails, so we won't talk about that. So this is as far as I got with it digitally, and I thought, well, actually that works. I can cope with that. Let's do the whole episode. So that's the whole episode cleaned up, and I was doing this as a sample of what I could do for John Beck, so as a proposition for doing this whole story. So I then, obviously this is all in the iPad, so I then started to put the colours on. Now, those of you who paid attention last year will remember that my first step with colouring is to put all the flat colours on. So this is another layer, if you remember about layers, of flat colours, upon which I can then paint digitally the extra details. Magically appear, there you go. So the wallpaper, the print on the armchair, and so on. The check on the apron. So that, I was quite pleased with how that turned out. Now, what I was trying for in this was to have the colours to emulate the sort of 1960s, 1970s colour palette of the annuals. So they're slightly more acidic colours than the currently would be used. They're a bit more 60s and 70s sort of glowing colours, brighter, with a bit more bite, and they stand out. There's a bit more contrast. And I was really happy with that. I thought that looks authentic. That looks like it could have come from a 1960s annual. It's clean, it's crisp, and as you can see, it's a step up from that to that. But it's a lot of work. It took a long time to get to that point. And I thought, well, there are 50 episodes to this story, which is 100 illustrations. And I thought, can I do that across 50 episodes? Can I spend all that literally erasing every side of each line to make sure it's the right thickness and it actually looks like it's drawn and not been rubbed out, you know? And then I thought, well, I possibly can. And then I got to this, episode 2, and I decided, no, I can't. There was no way I was going to spend time erasing around every raindrop, especially if you look at the postman's outfit, to erase what shouldn't be there rather than to find what should be. And especially when you get here, because Rupert's face is obliterated because the printing process has not picked up the fine lines around his nose and mouth. It's not picked up the fine lines of his shoe or the general, well, whatever. You had to work out what that was. Now, I needed to find out what should be in these pictures. And erasing stuff isn't going to help me. So I decided to use a technique that is used in comic books. I'm a big fan of comic books, and a lot of comic book artists now, they draw digitally on their iPad in blue, print it in blue, and then they ink manually with an ink pen over the top. And the reason they do that is because when you scan a drawing like that as a black and white piece of art, all of the blue disappears and you're left with just the black ink line. So I thought I would have a go. So this is what that same episode looks like, printed in blue ink. And what I also took the opportunity to do is tidy up all of the borders. All of these straight edges in all of the newspaper clippings were wonky, obviously because of the printing process and the deterioration over time. So I tidied all of these up, which means, and some of the sizings were out. Some of the frames were different sizes. So I've standardised the frames, whilst trying not to lose any of Bestall's artwork or his the way he was framing the scene. So just to honour his work. So here we have what roughly approximates the blue pencil work of an Alfred Bestall frame, and these are my trusty pens. They are brush pens that I got from Japan. One's slightly thicker than the other, so you can give a really nice flexible line. Now, Bestall would have been using an ink pen, a dip pen, like a fountain pen, to draw with a split nib. But I'm out of practice with those, and they are quite blotchy if you're not careful. And I didn't want to risk lots of blotches and stuff, so I'm using the brush pen, which gives the same flexibility of the thickness of line. Because Alfred Bestall's work, when you study it, it looks very simple from a distance, but when you study it, there are changes in depth and thickness of line, which will define shadow and form, which it's very subtle, and I had to find that in what is this printed mess. And these pens definitely helped me do that. And this was a great learning experience for me, really studying Bestall. I had lots of angles out around me, really studying how his inking process carried on. So here we have the first few lines. Now you notice I started on this side, not this side. Can anyone guess why? Because it's horrible. But yeah, so this was very tricky. So I thought I'd start on the side. So as you can see, where I pointed out earlier, there were missing fine details around his nose and his shoe and this part of Mrs. Bear's apron. I was able to find them with my pen. So it's a slight invention by me, but it's an invention based on what I was finding within Alfred Bestall's work. So basically I'm not putting my work in, I'm pulling Bestall's work out. That's how I was looking at it. So it was working, I liked it. And just to show you what I mean about the blue disappearing, this is a scan when I was halfway through this panel. So you can see all of the stuff that's in blue has not been picked up by the scanner. So that's just to demonstrate why I'm doing it that way. So you get nice, clean, black and white line work. And that is me rediscovering what Alfred Bestall originally drew in it with his ink pen 60-something years ago, 59 years ago. So when it was finished, it's gone from this to this. Much more clarity, much more defined. You can see really what's going on. You can see, and in some cases, I mean, you wonder why, but when you're printing something in colour, it's got to be this crisp. But hopefully you can see that I've been honouring the way Alfred was drawing it, what he intended to do. And so what I did, because I am me, I went back to the first episode, and that's the digital version I did, and I redid it in the same method. So I printed it out in blue and inked it. So you can see there's a difference. And I actually think, although that was acceptable and I was happy with it, this is far more in keeping with what I wanted to achieve. Here, you can see I was erasing lines to bring out things, and it just looked a bit stiff, whereas here, I was able to draw those lines in, and it just looked a bit more like a drawing rather than a patch job. So that's episode 1. It took me all that long to get to that point. So, and then I'm going to show you a few more examples. So you can see here, this is one panel from one of the episodes, and it's got bingo in it. I love bingo. But you can see it's quite blotchy and heavy around a lot of the areas. And we've still got the dots on. So this is the blue printed version with some of the line work. Now, what I'm doing is learning how to follow these original lines and find not where they are now because of the printing, but where they would have been originally when they were first drawn as an original piece of artwork. And so it's just finding the forms of the hands, the ears, and the foliage. Alfred Bestall had a very specific way of drawing foliage. It's deceptively simple. It's not simple at all. And once you start following it, it's not simple. To make you believe that these boys are in a bush with just those pen marks, it's quite something. Any other artist would have struggled with what looks so simple to show that they are hiding from a rainstorm in a bush, which is what they're doing. So this is the final drawn, inked version. So you can see it's gone from this to this. I've tried to maintain as much of the original intent as possible, but making up for some of this splotchy line work around here to give Rupert a better profile, making sure the hands and all this detail is correct. So when it comes to the colouring, it's got a really good framework for me to colour it convincingly. Had I tried to put that colour over that, it just wouldn't have looked very professional at all. So again, this is digital colouring on my iPad, and it's the same process that I talked to you about last year. So it's scanning the image in. This is then selecting layers, flat colour on one layer, and then details on the other. Like layers of glass, for anyone who wasn't here last year, it's like layers of glass with different things on each layer, which when you look from the front, shows the whole picture. And this is one of my favourite frames from the whole thing, so that's why I've included that.
But where's his fingernails?
No fingernails on this one, and if you look back, I didn't put them in area. Because I realised I had added those by trying to erase things and so on, but actually finding what was there, drawing it this way, I found those fingers. There is a little fingernail just there. But otherwise, it's just they are suggested. The shape of the nail on the outside is there, but there's no crescent. So, sorry, this process helped me find what was really there, rather than impose what I wanted to be there. So there you go. That's again. I just love that. That's the two friends. I love bingo anyway. So. Now, you might be wondering why I've suddenly cut to a very peculiar photo of a blue pencil. But as you could see, some of the frames were really badly blotchy, and there's a lack of detail. And just to go straight in with my ink pens, it would have been guesswork that possibly needed correcting. So in advance of doing that in some places, I used my blue pencil to put detail back in. And I will show you what I mean. This is an episode sort of about a third of the way through where, as happens every day in that wood, Rupert's being taken to the king of the birds on the back of a giant eagle. I mean, that's what happens, isn't it? But he's flying over this beautiful seascape, and there's something going on down here. And intuition tells you that's got to be a seaside town. But it's very, very loosely sketched in, and the printing process has removed a lot of detail that I know would have been there from what Alfred Bestall put in. You can see the church spire, you can see other bits, but that's not really very defined. And if we go onto the next page, you can see I left it to last because I inked everything I knew was there, but then this had to be worked out. It's definitely a seaside town. This is definitely cliffs, this is definitely the slope, that's clouds, that's sea, but that I had to really look. So I went through a lot of my old annuals and found similar sort of aerial distance pictures of towns and how Bestall drew in those elements. And I came up with that, which once it comes into focus, there you go, is still not crisply detailed because this, we're looking at 2 centimetres at the bottom of a frame. It's very, very small. I mean, it's roughly equivalent to the top half of your pointy finger, this span here. But it's enough that you can now see that it is a seaside town. And when I colour it, it gives me something to put my colours in and gives me something to be able to show that that's a seaside town. So that was a bit of lost detail that I added back in. Now, I don't want to spoil the plot, but the weatherman in this story is a little man from Rupert's weather clock at home. So it's one of those where the lady comes out when it's sunny and the man comes out when it's raining. And the weatherman has run away because the weather's gone bonkers. He's run away to find the clerk of the weather to try and sort it all out. And so has all the other weathermen from all the other weather clocks. Believe it or not, all of this is supposed to be all the little weathermen from all the weather clocks around Nutwood and Manchester and everywhere else. They are basically tiny little stick figures, and even when we have one that is supposed to be in close-up, you can see the printing has made the ink work on this very, very blotchy. So all of this really thick line work is not how Alfred Bestall would have originally drawn it, and all of this broken line work and blotches here, which still roughly resembles a little man, is not how it would have been originally drawn. So my task was to find what it was supposed to look like. So we have this much blown up. Now again, he's no bigger than your little, well, half of your little fingernail, if you think about him. He's very tiny, but I drew him with my trusty blue pencil and added as much detail as I could without going overboard. You can't put too much detail into something like this because it contrasts too greatly with the rest of the drawing. So you have to be faithful to what's intended. So basically I found his outfit and I found his shape, and also the same with the surrounding figures. Drew him with my blue pencil and then inked him over. So we've gone from this to this. Now the reason he doesn't quite look the same is because he wasn't drawn the same across all of the panels. Much as Alfred Bestall's work is sacrosanct, he wasn't particularly consistent with some of the drawing in this. So I basically modified the outfit so that every time this character appears it looks the same. Just to, it wasn't, I didn't really think it was my job to correct his mistakes, but in this case I just wanted it to look like the same character through make it really obvious. So there was a few changes here which match how he appears later on in the story. And here's another appearance of multiple little people. Again, very much had to find what they look like. And some of these characters are very, very tiny. So you can see in the bottom panel here, that looked like a traffic policeman, so he became a traffic policeman. And they've all got sort of vaguely Robin Hoodie outfits on, or that one looked like a little signalman that I'd seen in another story, so he became a signalman. And that one looked like he had a top hat on, and so on. So I gave them all, or tried to give them all, characters that were implied by what I could see already. And also, when you've got the equipment, I tried to make sure it looked as clean and crisp and as it was originally intended to look. And when you come to the weather clerk, well, I just had to. I had nothing to it but to add the detail of the jacket, the bow tie, the face, and the checks on the trousers. He just needed to be. His original detail was so lost in this smudgy printing, and likewise I drew the ladder in. So that's just a smudgy straight line, but I drew it so you could see. So I had something to colour as well later on. So, like I say, just finding and bringing out what I felt was really there, and giving some character to those elements that were really missing from the scans. And I thought you might like to see the process through. This is the very final episode of the story, and I thought you might like to see it from start to finish. So here it is. This is Rupert's got home, and he's telling Mummy and Daddy what's happened. And he runs to his weather house, and surprise, surprise, his weatherman is back. Sorry to spoil the ending. But so this, believe it or not, is all of the pens that I used to ink this story. Each one has a different purpose: thicker lines, thinner lines, straight lines, fine lines. And as I said, Alfred would have just used one dip pen. But in order to just do what he did, I needed all of these tools. There's also the little stump of a blue pencil, because I wore that one down quite a lot. And this is a Posca white pen. It's like a Tipex pen, but it's white paint with a very fine nib, and you can actually really correct any mistakes very nicely, very neatly, and it doesn't scan when you scan it. So here we have Rupert coming home. This little drawing of Bingo looking over the fence was almost not there, so I had to draw that back in. And I had to draw in details around the clock. And again, I was confirming these details with other panels where the same thing appeared to make sure it all was all consistent. And here we have various stages of me inking it in. And I included my hand so you can get to see the scale. So these little drawings are very, very small. But I started with Miss Bear, and you will see, if you look through, I actually changed my mind on how I was approaching Mrs. Bear's eyes. The eyes on Rupert and his family, some people just think they're just little dots, and they're not. And some people think they're just the pupils, and they're not. The eyes on Rupert and his family and his chums, actually the drawing describes the outer shape that you can see at any position that the head's in. So sometimes it will actually show eyelashes and lower lids and upper eyelids. Sometimes it will show the iris and so on. So you have to be really aware of the position of the head and what you're drawing, not just putting a dot for the eye. You have to be aware of what shapes you can see and what you're drawing. So I changed my mind on Mrs. Bear's eyes a few times as I was going. But yeah, so that's me drawing her hands in, and just as a side note, I don't know how Alfred Bestall or any of the other artists had patience to draw all these dots on Mrs. Bear's dress every time she appears. It's a lot. So you can see here how I've drawn elements back in, and this is me inking them in. And you can see also there's some blotches here that I had to work out what they were. So I decided to make them flowers because I felt like Mrs. Bear's flower garden is her pride and joy, so I thought I'd just emphasise those. And here you can see me drawing the lines on the gate with my fine liner, and that also gives you an idea of the scale of these things. And then moving on to the next episode, the next part of the episode. And that is basically how I did it. And I thought you might like to see, because last year we did focus quite a lot on the digital colouring, I thought you might like to see a couple of stages in this being coloured. So here we have, I've put on the apron, I've coloured the flat colours on Mrs. Bear's outfit, and I've done a nice graded sky. One of my favourite things in the Rupert annuals is Doris Campbell's graded skies. From the blue fading down to either the pinks or the yellows. They're the most beautiful, exquisite, hardest thing to do, but simplest thing to look at thing you could ever imagine. And when I'm colouring a Bestall story, I try to really honour the way she did it, because her colour palette, her attention to detail is just beautiful. So that's my nice version of a graded sky. And you can see it comes down below the skyline, but that's because the layers of colour go over the top of that for the rest. And the thing that I want to point out to you on this episode, is Mr. Bear's suit and the carpet and the tartan in the chair. Now, Doris and her other co-workers would have done it all by hand, obviously, and they would have drawn painted the lines on and so on. But obviously I'm doing that digitally, and I can find ways to do it a little bit more quickly, but still it looks authentic. So what I did was I created those materials in a separate file. So I made a digital fabric to make Mr. Bear's suit from, and a digital fabric for the armchair, and a digital fabric for the carpets. And what you can do in Procreate is you can take these and you can squish them and stretch them and mould them digitally, and then chop them out into the right shapes. So for this one, for example, for the carpet, I just literally digitally tilted it to whatever angle I needed it, and slotted it in, and then cut round to make sure it's the right shape. So all of the instances where these things appear in the story are consistent. They will always be consistent. I'm not allowing myself to make errors. So you can look when you get the book and see what I've done. But moulding the armchair with this fabric was great fun. I really, really mean that. And here we have it. That's the final coloured final episode. And things like this. And also what you have to remember is this was from the 60s. So you have to remember when you're colouring things, I remember these dried flower arrangements. They were still around in the 70s when I was little. So I was able to call on my own visual memory for what colours they should be there, that sort of dry leaf thing with seeds in. You have to be really true to what is required of the artwork. I'm not going to tell you what that file is, because that is quite key to the story and it's slightly dodgy. And I just thought I'd show you some other pages, because I'm quite proud of how it's turned out. I did colour it all digitally, as I've said, and I was really trying to be true to the colours of the angles of the time, to the work that Doris and her colleagues did. So to keep those colours true and bright and sort of acidy. So that horrible, messy frame that put me off right at the beginning turned out to be rather pretty in the end. Mrs. Bear's armchair with her floral arrangement, I'm very proud of. You can see the carpet here. And over here, again, giving away the plot a little bit, but Rupert ending up in the kitchen. So you can see here that effort I took to draw that little seaside town in. It's a very small part of the overall drawing, but it works. It gives you the ability to see that is a seaside town, and it was meant to be there. That's what its function is. And colouring all the birds was just great fun, frankly. Just choosing what colours. You have to be very careful when you're doing this thing, because you know what colours the buildings are going to be like, the ice creamy colours of the bird palace. So you have to make sure you colour the birds and everything else so that they stand out against it. So that's just the next level of thought process that needs to go into it. And here we have that episode that I told you about with all the tiny little people that I had to draw in. And there he is. And that's why I had to go to so much effort to make sure he was drawn correctly, because I needed to be able to make him look like a proper little man. And yes, there is shading on, light and shade on everything, which wasn't necessarily part of the old annuals, but I'd like to put on. And you've got the weather clerk. And again, almost every time I had to find his face, draw his face in, because it wasn't really very evident. And again, the little people, giving them all separate characters and making sure they were all performing as they should. Obviously, it's going in a book, and if it's going in a book, it needs a half title. This is my own original drawing. I tried to make it as close to Bestall's 1960s style as I could, and this is the half title page of Rupert and the Weatherman. So as you can see, I just shows lots of elements from the story and drew as closely without copying, and I promise you, without copying, it's just my own work, as close as I could to Alfred's style, so that fits nicely into the book. And I've done that with all of the stories that I've participated in for the new book. And I've got the original artwork of that on my stand if you'd like to come and have a look. I draw in A3, so it's twice as big. So when it scans down, you get a lot of nice, really crisp detail.
Is the weatherman sneezing in a handkerchief?
The clerk of the weather is sneezing, and that is the whole crux of the plot. Literally, it's why everything's as it is, and literally. It's a very simple plot and a very simple resolution, but it also, by today's standards, I think possibly slightly dodgy, but I'll let you decide when you read it. Now, also within the book, I worked on restoring and colouring a Mary Tourtel story. Now, fortunately, even though they're much older, the Tourtel pictures were printed much bigger and more crisply and have survived better. These were in a collection of a private individual who donated them, and actually, when you scan it, they don't look too bad. They're still a bit dodgy, but they just need a little bit of cleaning up. So this is digital cleaning up. I didn't have to do the whole print and re-ink, and I would have hated to do that because Mary Tourtel's line work is so fine. So there's so much of it. So it would have taken me a long time. So basically, I was able to just do some digital adjusting to tighten a lot of the lines up. And I won't bore you with the details, but basically you can slide things along to tighten things up, and then you can just erase like the dots and just tighten, and then add things in that might get lost. And then colour it. And again, I tried to be true to the colours that would have been right for Mary's time. So although her stories didn't really appear in colour, she did do the colour covers for the Monster Rupert books. So I tried to be true to her colour choices when I was doing that. And I think they turned out really well, and I've got a couple of printed examples of that too. And that is all 50 episodes of Rupert the Weatherman, which are at my table. Anyone who wishes to come and have a look at them after the talk, please do. I sometimes look at them and think, how did I do that? Generally, it's very rare for me to not. I don't look at them and see my work. I look at them and see that's a recovered Alfred Bestall. I hope you will all agree that that is what I've achieved. So, enough of me. Any questions? Yes, Sue.
Mark, so you're an hour into your fine black lining over the blue and you see your hand jerks. How many times did that happen?
It didn't.
It didn't?
No, it's really bizarre. There are a lot of times when I'm doing my artwork and I'm not sure what I'm doing, I do second guess myself and it can happen. But genuinely with this, I was almost in a hypnotic state. I was so enjoying discovering. I mean, I was doing very slowly. I wasn't rushing it. It was taking a long time. I mean, there's hundreds of illustrations. It took months. But I enjoyed it so much. There was a couple of places where I've used the white Posca to clear a line that maybe wasn't quite as where I wanted it. But I never really lost control of it, and I never committed to making the ink mark until I knew what I was looking for. So yeah, it was one of those really lovely moments where I'm completely at one with what I was doing. But it was a very slow process. Yes, hello.
Mark, your art was a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Two questions. One, in person, how long did it take you to do the Weatherman story? And the second one is, I've always been fascinated by the use of, or non-use of shadows in the Rupert stories. I noticed one or two of your friends had shadows in, some didn't. How do you decide what to put shadows?
Well, I was following what Alfred Bestall had done. So if he's cross-hatched a shadow, I'll put it in. Now, bearing in mind, the illustrations were always intended to be printed in black and white first. So you put cross-hatching in to simulate shadow, dark colours or whatever. So he would have done that for that purpose. If you're doing something that's just going to be in colour, you probably won't put much hatching in because you know the colours will create the shadows. But genuinely, I worked on the 50 episodes over the course of 3 months. And there are days when I was doing that all day, and days when I was doing a couple of hours. I really, truly switch off my time clock when I'm drawing. I was saying to someone earlier at lunch, I normally eat every 2 hours, and my body just tells me I have to eat. But when I'm drawing, that's the only time I forget to eat. You know, if unless I'm consciously thinking I need to eat at that time, I can just keep going. Everything. I don't listen to music. Nothing. My brain is just completely lost. Time means nothing. But it took about 3 months of fairly consistent work. I mean, the more complicated ones with all the little figures took longer, obviously, because I had to work out what they were doing. Where it's just Rupert, just a Rupert head or whatever, I could do those quite quickly. But yeah, quite. Sorry, you're
I was going to say, your original material from the newspapers was about 2 inches square for each one. How big would Bestall's original artwork be?
I'm not really sure. I'm assuming it's quite a lot bigger. Mostly with if you're doing illustration, you work half up or twice up. So half up would be half the size again, and twice up would be double size. So if working with John, because I've got a lot of his original work, his work is sort of that big. So if Alfred Bestall's probably was roughly that sort of size as well. So when I printed these out, I am absolutely certain I have printed it out much bigger than his original drawings would be. But that means I can get the detail in that I want to get in. The bigger I can work, the more confident I feel with that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. Do you do it sort of the end, in process, like you do all the illustrations into your blue line, and then do you work sequentially, or do you just pick your way through? Let's do all the Ruperts and all the little.
No, I did it sequentially. I wanted to do it the way Alfred Bestall would have done it. So I printed 10 episodes at a time and worked through from the first one to the last one. I might have jumped from side to side a bit because there were things I could find my way into the drawing with better. So I would have found my way into the Rupert a bit easier than some of the other stuff. But generally, if there's a part of the drawing that I'm nervous about, that gets done last. Because once everything else is in, it's easier then to find that bit that I'm nervous about. And that's true on all my artwork, really, even the private stuff that's not Rupert. If there's something I'm not sure about, I'll leave it until I really can't leave it anymore.
So, working on your restoration,
Yeah.
Does it kind of inspire you or tempt you to create your own Rupert's adventure?
I would love to do a Rupert story. I would love to write and illustrate my own, but that's a big time investment, which would mean it would need to be something I was paid to do, unfortunately, because I'm a professional full-time artist. I have to use my time on stuff that's paid for. I want to do one. I'm very keen to do one, but at the moment, my involvement with brand new stories is the stuff I'm doing with John Harold. You know, I'm helping him to colour the new work that he's doing. I would love to eventually, but it might be down to you guys. If you guys want me to do a story and want to sponsor me to do one, then I'm more than happy. More than happy. I would love to. I've got stories in my head. As I said, I'm a lifelong Rupert fan. The stories are always in there, and it's something that's definitely on my radar to do. Sorry. Yeah.
What actually sparked your original interest in Rupert?
The artwork. Yeah, I was never given a Rupert annual when I was little, but when I was about I'm a poor abused child. But no, when I was about 6 or 7, I went to the Scout jumble sale and I bought the 1974 Rupert annual because I loved the illustrations inside. And of course, as a child, I watched the puppet show. You know, that was my mum used to sing the theme tune to me. You know, so to buy an annual and just be so enchanted by the artwork. And that 1974, although it's an Alex Cuby cover, his first, the artwork inside is pure Bestall, and it's just magic to me. And I would copy those drawings at that age, and I've always, my go-to relaxation drawing has always been Rupert, always, that whole time. So I then joined the Followers as an adult, obviously, and that's when I used to go to the Canterbury signings and I met John Harold, and we became good friends. And even when I moved away to Bermuda and so on, we would correspond all the time. It's got to the point now we are in constant touch. I've had 5 messages from him this morning. But we chat all day every day because we're working together on a story, and also he recommends radio shows for me to listen to and things, and he helps me with my own personal projects as well if I need a second eye on it. So he really inspired me to keep drawing. And then, of course, when it came to the Rupert centenary, he was asked to do the story for the Express, and he asked me to colour it because he wouldn't have had time. And that's how I became involved with doing brand new stuff for the Followers. So, yeah, it's a lifelong, basically. Is that my time to go?
Well, one of the pressures on any organisers of any event like this is that you are conscious that we have a schedule and that we have to try to keep to that schedule. Otherwise, you know, one overrun leads to another one, and it just like a snowboard going down the hill. It gets bigger. So, but I want to thank you, Mark, very much. Very enjoyable talk. I'm sure everyone will agree with me. You would, if you've still got a burning question, you're angry with me because I've cut you off, Mark will be back on his stall in the corner
I'm in the
there,
far corner there.
and
Please
you
do come and say.
can speak to him
And if you want
directly.
and if you want to see these, I've got them with me.
There you are.
So,
So, I'll leave it to you to show your appreciation of Mark.